Thank you, Jessica. Nice to meet you, everyone, this morning. And let's get started. My name is Zoltan Danko, as Jessica said, and I'm delighted to be here today and talking to you about an amazing journey, how we succeeded with self-organization in our team. I dedicate this presentation to my friend and ex-colleague, Laszlo Popovic, with whom I enjoyed working with. I'm also grateful to Tim Ushinger, who thought that this story would be interesting to other people as well, other organizations. They can use the lessons and insights. The presentation summarizes my personal experiences and insights with this interesting project in the past 6 years. There are 3 major parts in the presentation. In the first part, I will talk about the context a bit. If you are not coming from the bank sector, then it will be useful for you. In the second part, about the story, how we succeeded, I will use just once this acronym ERFI. This is the Distributed System Development Unit in the bank. And the third part, the most important part, will be the insights and lessons we learned on the way. Once upon a time, there was a CEO and he had a dream. And it started like a big bang. And as Nelson Mandela wrote once, it always seems impossible until it is done. And this is true for our story as well. So giving you the background, how people think in a financial institution. And I put some quotes on the slide, and I will talk about this topic a bit. And one of the most important issues is we have done it in the past decades, so we know what to do. And this sentence I heard many times in the past years. Plus, another issue, national banks and other authorities regulate strictly how to do business legally, and it restricts the IT possibilities as well. Probably you can extend this list with other sentences and phrases you heard, but usually this makes the background in a financial institution. This true fairy tale story started in 2017. There was a CEO and he had a dream. Is it possible to create a startup like Tim in a bank from scratch, exclusively using internal employees? And it sounds simple, but as we learned on the way, it can become complicated very much. I was the first one who started this team, and it was interesting that I'm not coming from the bank sector, and that was critical in the next years. But I was experienced in team building because I have done it many times in my career. Plus, I was not a software engineer either. And it was also important because I think team building is more about human skills and capabilities and not the technical ones. But I had the faith and the confidence that it can be done. First things first, this is my personal principle. So we lay down some principles we want to use on our way forward. The first one is creating high-performance IT systems with the lowest budget. Sounds curious, but if you have a lot of money, then you have plenty of assets to use for basically anything. But if you constrain yourself to have the lowest budget, that's tricky. The second one, using only open source technologies. If you look at the banks in Europe, all of the banks, then you may see the same stacks technologies around, but using exclusively open source technologies, that was something new. and minimal usage of suppliers. If you work with banks, then you can see a lot of suppliers, but we said that, okay, let's do the work with internal employees only and minimize, if not excluded, all the suppliers on the way. Fine, we have the principles, but how can we find the right people, the right staff for this work? And the engineers do have also big dreams and they like big projects. Ours was an immediate payment system to the country, and we focused on the mindset when we want to get the right people on board. And because we thought that if you have the right mindset, then probably you will learn the technical stuff later, because this mindset includes lifelong learning as well. Okay, we know which kind of people we would like to get on board, but how to get them on board? For that reason, we created a special hiring method, which means different from the agile practices. And it was also crucial because to find the people and to attract them to this team, that was not usual stuff also. For that reason, we created a mindset test, and this test was not a usual psychological test you may see and find in many organizations, but we created a special one, and I come back to this topic in 1 minute. The second part of this hiring process was a technical test. Of course, we wanted to map the technical capabilities and knowledge of the colleagues as well. Although the most important part of this hiring process was the third part, which was a team interview, because we had the strong belief those people should interview the candidate who will work with this individual. And they had to decide which is the proper mindset, the proper culture and technical capabilities. If they sit next to each other 8 hours a day, then it's a crucial factor anyway. And the final station was the salary negotiations. And with this stage, we completed the whole process. And we had some expectations as well. For example, we have to complete all this process within days, because good people can find a new job, another option easily and fast. And the result, and it was important, in the first 4 years when we used this hiring process, we had a very interesting fluctuation rate. You know, in HR, fluctuation rate is an important number, how many people come and go in a team. So in the first 4 years, we had this fluctuation rate around 0.001%. And that was really strange within the whole company. So coming back to the mindset test, I brought you a few questions from this test, and you can test yourself answering the questions. The colleagues Jessica will help me with the Mentimeter. You will see the questions, and you get as much time the candidates had to answer the questions, and I move on. So let's start. This is the first question.
Let's see.
Try to choose the right answer.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Zoltan, it will not. Some people found it. Oh, good.
Okay.
But it will only let me add the first 2 questions.
Okay.
Into the...
And the next question?
Yes, put that up because it also wouldn't let me do that. So I will put the third question in the chat.
And the third question,
Yeah.
if you're ready. If you're interested whether you found the right answer to these questions, we can get back to the results at the end of the presentation. Ready? Okay, let's move on. We had the principals and we had the people on board. Our next question was the software technology we will use. We couldn't look at the other banks in Europe because they used almost the same stuff everywhere. So there was no point to do so. But we were looking for companies in the world who made financial transaction in real-time manner and who tested all the technologies that could be used for this purpose. And we found these companies, and actually we copied what they used. We took over all the software stacks they used because they spent a lot of money to find the proper ones. So we shouldn't pay the same amount for this purpose as well. So we had the software technology as well. And then the last question was, which methodology can guarantee the results? Because everyone is interested in the results. And we thought that Scrum would be a good idea. All the big companies broadcasted in the world that that's the nirvana and it is a good idea to use Scrum. And it's a fancy thing to be agile. As John Maxwell wrote once, teamwork makes the dream work. So we started with Scrum. However, when we reached 60 people on board, we started to face some challenges. For example, colleagues came from heterogeneous environment, from different companies with different cultures. On the one extreme, some of the colleagues enjoyed the freedom which we provided them to work for work. On the other extreme, there were people who desperately wanted a boss to make decisions and to figure out where we go. Plus, all the colleagues had a different learning speed as well. So these differences made it quite difficult to coordinate everyone on the same track. Plus, if you worked in a big corporation, then you know that it's a challenge if you want to provide with all the technical equipment like laptop, phone, and so on, email address, what's needed for the work. And we wanted to give all of this stuff on the first day of the newcomer because we hired the people that they should work on the project. And at this time, we had 4 newcomers on our team per week. So it was an intense period we went on, but we had to manage all these challenges on the way. And then we arrived at a really interesting station, culture. If you introduce a new methodology without any cultural groundwork, then you may end up in a theater when the actors play the stuff that they don't mean it at all. The groundwork is not equal to workshops, 2 series of workshops in 4 hours, because it is not enough. Plus, we thought that the Scrum Masters would care about these cultural topics as well, and we'll be fine. In the meantime, the software development went well. That was a good news, despite all these challenges. And everything was fine. We were on time in the project. However, very soon we had some problems and our methodology turned into a debacle. And just give you some example. Communication among the teams was critical and didn't go well. Actually, they didn't talk to each other enough. Plus, colleagues worked on the same piece of software parallel without noticing it. So that was also not a good sign of the project. And extreme amount of meetings frustrated the colleagues thanks to the Scrum Masters. Plus, unnecessarily long meetings for example, for planning 2 hours each, thanks to the Scrum Masters as well. And the colleagues were quite frustrated about that. They wanted to work, but instead they sat in a meeting. And on top of these problems, the Scrum Masters started to fight a faith battle. Who can understand accurately the Bible of the Scrum? And that was the point where we had a big dilemma. What next? Because these problems endangered the project and we had to do something. It was a tough decision, but we decided to say goodbye to Scrum altogether and the Scrum Masters as well. And we endeavored into the unknown at this point. We read the literature, we read Lalu, we read Holacracy and other literature stuff which were recommended to us to use. But we thought that TIL was too diffuse that time in 2017. And potentially we would run into the same faith battle again. Therefore, we decided we don't use the name and the diffuse context of TIL. Instead, that was the birth of the self-organization in our team. And slowly, we had 100 people on board. And that was a huge amount of professionals. And we changed basically the operating system in our team. These 100 people were separated in different teams. 6 to 8 professionals worked in a team. We kept the organization flat. We had altogether 3 leaders on the team, and 3 because that was the minimum number for the HR department, still acceptable. And we had smart professionals as well on board who could make professional and technical decisions required in the project. And the decisions made together with responsibility. And that was a tricky part of the story because we had several discussions in all staff meetings and other meetings as well, what responsibility means, because it wasn't obvious for everyone on the team. The 3 leaders had the responsibility to care about the working environment, the human conditions, and also the removal of the blockades on the road ahead. And that was plenty, really. And we created also a new team. We called it Sentinel team. And this team consisted of people coming from other teams. It was an additional role to these people. And they had the responsibility to deal with the methodology, with the personal conflict situations on the team that appeared from time to time. And they had to care about everything in the transition from Scrum to this self-organization methodology. And this establishment, I mean the Sentinel team, was interesting because usually the professionals got used to it having Scrum Masters and they did different jobs, for example, scheduling meetings and others. And now all these tasks were separate, was put on the teams, and they had to work with these tasks as well. And we produced a document as well. We called it Principles, a kind of way of working, how we would like to work with each other. And later, we open sourced this document for everyone, if interested. If you want, you can find it on my LinkedIn profile. And this document summarized everything about the roles, about the culture, about the way of working on the team. And just give you some rules how we use self-organization. For example, teams could decide how many stand-ups they need in a week, 2 or 5, or how many they wanted, or how long a planning meeting, for example, can last. If they finished everything in 20 minutes, then that was 20 minutes. And the other one, self-organization meant for us, you can choose any ceremony, any rituals from any other methodologies under 2 conditions. You should like it, and this ceremony or ritual must support the working daily habits as well. If these conditions are met, then fine. And it can be the Prince methodology, it can be Scrum. For example, some teams use Kanban as well for their purposes. And changing the culture and moving forward with the project, we came to the moment of enlightenment. We realized that the success of a methodology depends on the level of the colleagues' human or personality development. And it sounds strange a bit in the first place, but we realized that we have to do something with this topic. Otherwise, we can jeopardize the project as well. So we started to organize internal workshops for human development for all of the colleagues on the team. The main goal was to reduce the conflict situations they appear day by day. Or how can we give tools the colleagues that they can avoid or minimize these conflict situations? In the first period, we had the workshops for 25 minutes, and it was 25 minutes because everyone told me that talking to software engineers about psychology, that's a really, really bad idea. So that was the starting point. Let's start with 25 minutes. And since it was mandatory in the first period, everyone was in these workshops and participated. In the second period,
yeah. I give you a couple extra minutes because we started late, but we are...
Okay, I will.
If you can wrap it up, so then we can have a conversation.
Yeah. So we, in the second period, the colleagues joined the workshops voluntarily, and they used it in the daily practice. Finishing the presentation about the achievements. The first and most important achievement for me was people started to like the Monday mornings. If you can find many companies with this feature, then that's fine. Plus, we use this pluralistic methodology, and it was fine for everyone in the team. Lessons we learned, just 2 of them. If there is a new story for the software engineers before finishing the current project, then you should tell about it, because if you don't do that, interest starts fading, and that's a problem. Plus, you have a catch-22 as well. If people don't see the leader frequently, they feel they are unimportant. If the leader is there all the time, people expect the decision from the leader. So that was a tricky situation. And technical results, planned downtime when we shut down the systems for maintenance was 0 in 2 years when these systems we provided run. The unplanned downtime also 0, which means no breaks at all. And the license cost also 0 because we used open source. And lessons on the methodology and humanity, 2 of them interesting. Belief systems always override logic. If you introduce a system with logic, then you have to face with this challenge because belief systems are much stronger. If you don't handle them, that's a problem. And trust and fears exclude each other. Many companies talk about trust, but if in a fear-based hierarchical organization, fear is the basic emotion, and trust and fears go not good with each other. If you prefer open-minded people on board and you can gather all these people who can work and learn open-mindedly, then they will generate an open culture, and that will enable the open source technology capabilities as well. And finally, in 2020, we won the first prize in an HR competition for the category Future-Proof Organization. And as the jury explained after that, it was an obvious decision in the jury because the culture, the human support, and the human development enabled a community for high level of self-realization and resilience in a changing environment. So it wasn't written by HR people, but we won in front of HR people. Let us work together for future workplaces. If you have questions, go ahead.
Thank you, Zoltan. Thank you, yes. You can stop sharing then. You can stop sharing the screen.
Yep.
And we do have a question in the chat. Could the teams decide not to have stand-ups and planning meetings?
Sorry, can you repeat it?
Could the teams decide not to have stand-ups and planning meetings?
Actually, it is a possibility as well. If the people sit together all day, then they can discuss all the topics relevant for the work. I don't think it's important to sit in another room and talking about the same topics. Yes, it is a possibility. After Scrum, people prefer to have stand-ups, but as I said, some teams had 2, other teams had 5 per week.
Okay. Feel free to drop questions, of course, into the chat or into the Mentimeter. I have one question in the Mentimeter. How would you compare Teal and your pluralistic methodology?
If you want, our methodology can be seen as a Teal branch because Teal is, I use the word diffuse, that means there are different approaches from different companies, how they used the so-called Teal. Scrum was much more strict methodology in my view. So that's why I didn't use Teal many times in the presentation, because I think all the way how we worked in self-organization kind of part of the Teal culture.
Okay. Anyone have any questions to add? Okay, there's another question here. How did you deal with people who wanted a boss?
I talked to them many times, and there were 1 or 2 colleagues who were reluctant and wanted definitely a boss. They left the team. because all the other guys on the team enjoyed not having a boss on top, and this boss can say everything. I can give you an example. Once a colleague came to my room and said, I should decide about this technical issue. And I replied, okay, there are two possibilities. On the one hand, you are the professional, which is your choice in this case. And the colleague told about the choice. Okay, the second option would be, I will decide about it because I'm not a software engineer. Probably that will be a stupidity, but you have to do it afterwards. What would you choose in this case? Usually, they were smart guys, so they could make the decision.
Okay, I have another question in the chat.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a bit more about showing that you care as a manager without micromanaging?
Yes, I referred to this point with Catch-22. I didn't go to the team and visited all the team members all the time. And that was a problem for some colleagues that I wasn't present and they didn't know what I was doing in the meantime. But not being present made it obvious for the colleagues that they should make the decisions. Of course, I participated in the strategy meetings and the strategy decisions where we go if there was a problem with huge implications or which affected other problems in the bank with other systems as well. I participated all the time. But I preferred to create this workshop series instead and moved on with the human side and not the technical side. So I tried to differentiate these both fields of activity or responsibility.
There's sort of a follow-up question here.
Yeah.
What if they don't come to the manager and ask for a decision?
That's not a problem because the team have to decide about technical and professional issues. And we had a core team with the most senior guys and architects, technical architects on the team. And the colleagues were expected to discuss issues with these colleagues. So I wasn't sad if not all the colleagues came to me all the time with all the questions, because it's much better if those people decide about these questions who are smart enough and had experience with these questions.
Great, thank you. So in the comments, again, I noticed that you use the word colleagues, which is amazing. What is the story behind the word?
As I said, we managed the team in a flat organization. And it meant that the managers, the three managers, were not on a shelf higher than anyone else, but we tried to be with the people. And it was difficult because people coming from different other cultures, from hierarchical organizations, they were used to these structures, and it was a difficult task for me to make them forget about this hierarchical thing. For that reason, we prefer to use the word colleague for everyone on the team, including myself. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, double thumbs up. It looks like it was answered. Thank you, Eric. If you had to say what was one thing that was your biggest obstacle along the way, what would that be?
When two cultures met in the company, I mean ours and other teams' cultures, which were somewhat different from ours. But after a while, the other teams started to take over the results and achievements we had. So the cultural differences, I would say.
Okay, what other questions do you have for Zoltan? I know I have a question. Oh, wait, here's one. Niels has a question. We'll go with yours first. Niels, did you promote working within a purpose? Could it be that the resistance came from the bosses who had difficulty leading this way?
We didn't use the word purpose very often because this word similar to responsibility. If you use the word purpose, then everyone has a different purpose, and that's quite difficult to have a common platform for everyone. And for that reason, I remember we had an all-staff meeting talking about responsibility because, to my surprise, it was not obvious for everyone, and we had different meanings. And until this purpose is used or overused in the meantime, it makes things much more difficult. If we can formulate simple without technical words, because the purpose is used until like a technical concept, let's talk we call it kitchen language, as simple as possible. We should formulate what we want to say. And for that reason, we didn't use the word purpose many times. Resistance and bosses, actually, we didn't have bosses. We preferred to lead the team and to be there, to be present in the time of need. But other times, we let the team work. I wanted to avoid micromanagement. I hate it, so I tried not to do it. And my colleagues can tell how successful I was in this respect, but that was an important factor for me, not to tell the colleagues all the time what to do. Because as Steve Jobs said once, if you hire smart people, then that's the bad thing to tell them what to do, because they are here because they know what to do and how to move on. Okay, what was your biggest surprise during the journey? Possibly the realization that not everyone wants to grow. We think it's self-evident that I want to learn, I want to grow, and I want to acquainted with different new things, but it isn't for everyone. And for that reason, you have to hire the kind of people who can deal with freedom. Some people don't like it, or it is too confused for them to live in a complete freedom. And for that reason, that was a huge surprise to me as well, that if you face colleagues who don't want to learn because they think they learned everything and that's the end of the story, then that's a problem and a difficulty. We had some colleagues of this kind, but it was not easy. And not easy for them as well, because we moved in another direction and we had to part for that reason. How often is the team formed?
You're doing my job for me, Zoltan.
Yeah.
You're just reading the question yourself.
How often? I would say continuously, because when we start using Scrum, it was an invention all the time. And for that reason, we started this Sentinel team, because we had only questions, and we didn't know the answers, how to move on, how to make the life for our professionals comfortable enough, how smooth must our methodology will be to enjoy the daily work. And as I said, the main responsibility for leaders to remove the obstacles on the road ahead. And for that reason, if the methodology is smooth enough, like the design, if you don't realize that you are using an application, for example, that's a good design and a good application. And for that reason, the often doesn't describe what we did. The Sentinel team came up with ideas, we tested ideas or modified ideas and approaches. The first fixed thing was the Principles, this way of work document, which crystallized all the lessons we learned and all the learnings we want to share with everyone. And that was one of the reasons why we open sourced this document, because it could be helpful for other individuals and organizations as well, not to copy it, but using as a baseline and modify it as much as important to modify some points. Plus, I asked the legal advisors in the company to go through this document and to figure out if there is no contradiction with the law in the country. And that was also an important factor, that we covered everything regarding this document to use it not just in our team, outside the team as well.
And just to reiterate that question for the recording, it was how often were the teams reformed? Did the same people work together over many sprints in a row?
To answer the second part of the question, after 2 years, as I remember, we made a plot. That was a meeting for all morning long. And we created booth within the office. And there were people who represented one application or one part of the software, and all the other colleagues could go around and asking questions about that topic. And the next task was, which team would you like to join next? And we reshuffled the whole team within 3 hours. And the most important result was there was only 3 people where we had to make some modifications for some reasons, but all the other people reshuffled themselves autonomously, and that was a huge result after 2 years.
Great. Other questions for Zoltan? If not, I have a question. So I'm very curious, Zoltan, about the multiple choice questions you shared with us that you were using. I want to know the answers. I'm one of those people who really needs to know the answers. So I'm going to put the 3 questions in the chat, and I would love to know.
Okay.
So hold on, let me put them in there so people can see.
I remember of the first question, so I can start.
Yeah, they're there. How do you cross a crowded square quickly?
Actually, there is no key for the right answers for these questions. And that was one of the most important feats of this questionnaire for the mindset. We don't know the right answer to these questions, but we are curious which is the answer of the candidate to these questions. And imagine 40 similar questions in a row, and the candidate had 50 minutes to answer all these questions. And from the answers, they could construct a picture of the candidate. For example, let's take the first question. How do you go across the crowded square quickly? If you choose C, then you might be an introvert person, like many software engineers, and you don't go into the conflict, but you go around in situations. But we mostly liked those candidates who chose the answer D for the first question, which is not listed. And that was the point. How many candidates dare to take their own answers? Because it was not prohibited to add new answers, which you think appropriate to this question. And only less than 10% of all the candidates dared to choose their own answer. We were looking for these people, of course, because it's a mentality, it's a capacity to work and to live in freedom, because you can define your path autonomously. And this answer is true all the other questions as well. I don't know if I answered.
No, that's interesting. Does anyone have a comment or question on that methodology?
There are some candidates who were furious about we didn't tell them it is a possibility to add answers. And I replied, that was the point.
So they didn't know they could? Okay, so...
Yes. No, they didn't.
Okay.
Did the choice of open source help them?
Yes, did the choice of open source help the mentality of contributing?
Yes, it helped, but it's a tricky question. As you could see on one of the slides, in a bank, everything is a secret. And the contribution is tricky because if you share a code into the public, then you may have compliance issues. And for that reason, and it wasn't accidentally that we started with the principles in the open source approach, because this document went through the legal department, the compliance department, all the departments, and we actively used it. So yes, it helped, but it also an aspect of the freedom. Using open source is connected with the concept of freedom. And all the software engineers who worked in the team, I think, enjoyed this option as well. Not the usual big suppliers you may know very well, but finding the pieces and putting them together, because it takes creativity and professionalism as well.
Great.
I don't know, Niels, I answered your question.
Well, yes. What I'm actually trying to explore is this change of culture, and what mechanisms helped the culture on the way. And I was wondering here if the open source choice in itself was moving the culture. So, yeah, not exactly what I was going for.
Actually, using open source, and I can say exclusively open source technology, was one of the founderstone in the beginning. And when the software engineers noticed that we are using open source, it was an attraction factor, definitely, that they wanted to come to our team. Because not many people could imagine that open source could be used in a bank freely for software engineering purposes. And since we delivered the results as well, so we completed the circle with this moment. I mentioned the downtimes of the software, and it was a huge software, actually. And yes, the way of working using open source technologies and using an open mindset, they went hand in hand in the past years. If that was what you imagined, yes, it's a combination which is required. If you take an organization, a hierarchical organization using open source technology, there will be difficulties, definitely. Plus, software engineers like to participate or contribute to the public because this is the baseline for open source technologies. And as I know, for example, in Apple, software engineers are not allowed to contribute to open source technologies, which is not liked very much in the company. So we try to combine these things because they have to go together.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your questions. I mean, we have time for one more. If anybody has one last question for Zoltan.
Which is the question you didn't dare to ask? Just another glimpse. We had all staff meetings for everyone, and we recorded all the meetings. And that was again part of the culture. If the leaders will be recorded what they lied 1 week ago, then that's another situation. Like you're aware, you will be recorded, and you have the responsibility to keep your word. And for that reason, we recorded all sub meetings for the colleagues, not just for those who were on holiday or on sick leave, but for this purpose as well.
Eric has an interesting question here. What is the question that they forgot to ask?
Probably, how was it possible to create such a team in a bank? Because we had connections to many banks in Europe, and I had a lot of friends and business colleagues in Europe working as consultants and in other professions. And they said in big and rich European countries, it is impossible in a financial organization to even start such an endeavor. And for that reason, I chose Nelson Mandela's quote. It has a challenge feeling to start an endeavor which seems to be impossible. And because we did it, it was a good feedback at the end of the story that if you think it is not possible, you won't know it until you try it. And that was basically one of the big lessons I learned in these years.
Thank you, Zoltan.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.